Hey, hi guys. Welcome to week 5 of the course. I guess that's what it is that we're in. So we're just I'll keep this really short this week. I won't go into too much detail, simply because I think there's one big shift I think that we should consider. Keep in mind as we're moving through the readings for this week. We've read through roughly I don't know I guess the first couple hundred pages up until we make a distinct turn, I guess, towards the end of your reading for this week. Let me see exactly where. I think it's probably somewhere around. We get into. Missed it. We you. I don't know, page 250 or whatever it is. We finished part one of the text, right? Part one being, and we began to get into. We finished part one, which is the U.S. side of the border, and we move into, geographically anyway, in the novel, the setting shifts from the United States to Mexico. But I think there's something very distinct in the shift, and that's also I guess, point of view, I think might help us explain the role of indigenous identity and how it's playing out in this text. Is different in the United States, within the world of this novel anyway. Indigenous identity is different in the United States than it is in Mexico. I would say, not to generalize, just to generalize for the sake of discussion, that by and large, indigenous identity in the United States within the text is one which is deeply impacted by the forces of history and by the materialist force, and by essentially an exclusion from society to those more external or sort of subcultures even of society, or deeply marginalized, right? Native identity in the United States is deeply marginalized, maybe less so today than it's ever been before, which is why I have us sort of reading through and looking at so much of what's going on in contemporary media, and how indigenous identity is beginning to come to the forefront or at least carve out a space for itself. I'm not so sure that there is a forefront for media today because it's so atomized and dispersed, but I think that Native identity is certainly coming to the forefront in some ways, learning to carve out a space for itself within global media. And so that's why I have us looking at so many of those articles. But by and large, throughout all of sort of colonial history in the United States, from the landing of Columbus in 1492, and then with the settler colonial system, it's played out all the way up until this year, 2017. Native voices have oftentimes been marginalized and submerged and made almost to be alternate to the reality. And so we see that within the first, in this first point of view of the novel in the United States, how indigenous identity has carved out a space for itself, but it's there within the belly of the underworld. But as we shift to, sorry, it's my dog. But as we shift to Mexico, we see indigenous identity play out a little bit differently. And it becomes less almost in terms of legality and illegality and outlaws and the extension of the family that we saw in Tucson, and it becomes more an identity based upon class, right? And how one can sort of identity changes in correlation sometimes with where people are at within the class structure. And so we see that with the introduction of in book 2, with the introduction of the character of Minardo. Still, though, things are operating on this sort of subversive, sort of within the realm of the illegal. But also it becomes more class-based, but also in terms of the power structure and how Minardo is trying to find a place for himself within the power structure. Instead of selling narcotics, he's now selling arms and security. He's a paramilitary. Excuse me, it's my dogs. So let me shut this door. So we, I think that shift matters because it's how the politics of indigeneity shifts between the United States and Mexico. So pay attention to that as the shift occurs. Also, though, I think what's happening here is that we're beginning to see this sort of interconnectedness, I think, between the world of Tucson and the world of Mexico. Obviously, these worlds, if, you know, in the novel should merge at some point. And so I think we can begin to see how that plays out here as we make this turn. The novel in some ways becomes more political, right? There's a great line, I think it's on page, it's like 218 or something. I'm going to turn to it. It's at the end, it's where Calabasas, right? Calabasas, who really identifies this Yaqui identity for the reader and really comes in to stand between the relationship between Calabasas, Root, and Mosca, and also how Pharaoh and Polly sort of fit into that, and how Lecha and Zeta, how this is all sort of coming together. But there's a great line there on 218 that says, politics, it's never helped any of us, but here it is, right? This idea of politics it's almost as though indigeneity in the United States and within Tucson is a depoliticized, right? Which within the world of the novel, it's a very depoliticized identity. But when we shift into Mexico, this idea of class becomes deeply politicized, right? And it's as though the natives are being drawn into, even though it's depoliticized in Tucson, they're still being drawn into its power in some way. So, you know, that's my brief sort of spin on our readings for this week, up to page 300. Obviously, for next week, I just want you to continue on, read up to about page 400 and do a post. And at some point, we'll begin to sort of, and we see this shift as it becomes politicized, it becomes indigeneity, becomes somewhat more global. And we'll talk about that somewhat next week. All right. Okay, so any questions at all, feel free to email me, send me a text, whatever you need to do to reach out to me. I look forward to reading your post, and we'll talk again next week. All right, thanks. Bye.